My daughter was found in a ditch, 7 months pregnant, beaten so badly she could barely open one eye, and the woman who did it said she deserved it. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood there in the hospital hallway, my hands still smelling faintly of soil from the tomatoes I had been picking just an hour earlier, and I made a decision. What I did next would put that woman behind bars and tear her family apart from the inside. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. It started on a quiet afternoon, the kind that feels almost too ordinary to matter. I was in my backyard, barefoot in the grass, pulling the last of the summer tomatoes from the vine. The sun was warm on my shoulders, and for a moment, everything felt steady, predictable, safe. At 63, you learn to appreciate those moments. You don't chase excitement anymore. You protect peace. That's when my phone rang. It was my neighbor, Dorothy. Her voice wasn't right. You know how people sound when they're trying not to panic? When they're holding something back, because saying it out loud would make it real. Eleanor, she said carefully, your daughter's car is off Miller Road, in the ditch. You need to come. Now. I didn't ask questions. I didn't take off my gloves. Didn't lock the back door. I just got in my car and drove. I don't remember the speed limit. I don't remember the turns. I only remember the feeling, like something inside my chest had already broken, even before I saw her. Simone, my daughter. She was slumped against the passenger window of her own car. The door was hanging open, crooked, like someone had dragged her out and then changed their mind. Her face. One side was swollen beyond recognition. Her blouse was torn at the shoulder. There were bruises already forming along her arms. And she was 7 months pregnant. 7 months. I ran to her, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. When I touched her cheek, she flinched. Flinched, like she thought I was going to hurt her. Baby, I said, my voice shaking just enough to remind me I was still human. It's me. It's Mom. She opened one eye. The other stayed shut. And then she whispered something that changed everything. They said, she struggled to breathe, her voice barely there, his sister said. I deserved it. I felt something inside me go completely still. Not rage. Not yet. Something colder. More precise. I held her hand the entire way to the hospital. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just watched her chest rise and fall and counted every breath like it was a promise I intended to keep. My name is Eleanor Graves. I raised Simone alone after her father left when she was 4 years old. I worked 31 years as a high school English teacher. I paid my bills on time. I kept my home in order. I taught my daughter to be kind, to be strong, and to never depend on anyone who hadn't earned her trust. She was the best thing I ever did. Warm, thoughtful, strong in a quiet way. 2 years ago, she married into the Caldwell family. And I knew, from the very beginning, something wasn't right. It wasn't anything obvious. No shouting, no scenes, just looks, little pauses in conversation, a certain tone that slipped in when they thought no one was paying attention. His sister, Renata, was the worst of it. She never raised her voice, never said anything openly cruel. But the way she looked at Simone, it wasn't dislike. It was calculation, like she was measuring her, weighing her, deciding what she was worth. I ignored it, because that's what you do when your daughter tells you she's happy. You ignore the things that don't make sense. You tell yourself you're imagining it. You stay quiet. I won't make that mistake again. Because what happened on Miller Road wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was planned. And by the time I walked out of that hospital parking lot that night, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The hospital room was too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, the kind that presses against your ears until every sound feels too loud. The steady beep of the monitor, the soft hiss of oxygen, the faint shuffle of nurses' shoes in the hallway. I sat beside Simone's bed and watched her sleep. Or at least something close to sleep. Her face was swollen, one side wrapped in gauze. Her lips were cracked. There was a deep purple bruise spreading along her collarbone, disappearing beneath the hospital gown. And every now and then, even unconscious, her fingers would twitch, like her body still remembered what had happened, even if her mind was trying to escape it. I didn't touch her again, not after the way she flinched in the car. Instead, I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, and I waited. Time moves differently in a hospital. Slower, heavier, like every minute has weight. A young doctor came in around midnight. She looked tired, but not careless. That mattered to me. She has 2 cracked ribs, she said quietly, a fractured cheekbone, and significant bruising consistent with impact, possibly being thrown. Thrown. She didn't say it harshly, just clinically, like it was something she'd seen before. I nodded. And the baby? I asked. She paused, just for a second, but I saw it. That hesitation. The baby's heartbeat is strong, she said. We're monitoring closely, but right now, that's a good sign. A good sign. I held on to that. Not hope. Not relief. Just something solid. I need to know if she's been able to speak, I said. A little, the doctor replied. She asked for you. Of course she did. I thanked her, and when she left, I sat back down beside the bed. Simone woke up about 20 minutes later. Not fully, just enough to open her eye and look at me. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just stared, like she was making sure I was real. I'm here, I said softly. Her throat moved as she swallowed. They said, she started, then stopped. I didn't rush her. Didn't fill the silence. After 31 years of teaching, you learn something important. People tell you the truth faster when you let them reach it themselves. It was Renata, she whispered finally. I didn't react. Not outwardly. She called me yesterday. Simone continued, her voice barely audible. Said Marcus wanted to meet, about paperwork. The land. The land. That was the first time I heard it mentioned. He wasn't there, she said. Just her and 2 men. Her breathing grew uneven. I could see the effort it took just to keep talking. She said I didn't belong. That the land should stay in the Caldwell family, real family. Her eye filled with tears, but they didn't fall. She said people like me marry into money. People like me. I felt my jaw tighten. And then, I asked quietly. One of them grabbed me, she said. I fought. I tried to leave. Her hand moved slightly, like she was reaching for something that wasn't there. I hit the fence, she whispered. Metal post. I think I blacked out. The room went still again. When I woke up, they were gone. 7 months pregnant. Left alone. On the side of the road. I let that settle inside me. Not as anger. Not yet. As information. Did you sign anything? I asked. Her eye flickered toward me, confused. No, she said. I wouldn't. Good. That mattered more than anything she probably realized. I leaned back in my chair. And for the first time since Dorothy's call, things began to line up. The fake meeting. The missing husband. The strangers. The pressure. This wasn't random. This wasn't emotional. This was organized. I stayed with Simone until she drifted back to sleep. Then I stood up, slowly, and walked out of the room. The hallway lights were too bright. Cold. Unforgiving. I passed a vending machine, a nurse's station, a man sleeping in a chair with his head tilted back. Life going on like nothing had happened. I stepped outside into the parking lot. The air was cooler than I expected. I stood there between 2 parked trucks and looked up at the dark sky. And that's when I finally let myself think. Not feel. Think. Renata didn't act alone. People like her don't get their hands dirty unless they're sure the outcome is controlled. She expected Simone to sign. Expected her to be scared enough, or hurt enough, to give up that land. And when that didn't happen, things escalated. Simple as that. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. There was only one person I was going to call. My brother. Calvin. He picked up on the second ring. Cal, I said. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. I need you. There was a pause on the other end. Not confusion. Not questions. Just recognition. I'm on my way, he said. That was all. He hung up, and I stood there in that parking lot, the night air settling around me, and made something very clear in my own mind. I was done being polite. Done giving people the benefit of the doubt. Whoever did this to my daughter, they weren't walking away from it. Calvin arrived at 2:03 in the morning. I remember the time because I had been watching the clock without realizing it. Every few minutes, my eyes would drift to the red numbers glowing on the wall across the waiting room, like they were the only thing keeping track of reality. 2:03. He walked in carrying a thermos and a yellow legal pad. That's how Calvin has always handled things. Not with noise. Not with emotion. With structure. He didn't rush to me. Didn't ask a dozen questions. He sat down across from me, unscrewed the thermos, poured coffee into the lid, and slid it toward me like we were sitting at a kitchen table instead of a hospital waiting room in the middle of the night. Start from the beginning, he said. So I did. I told him everything. Dorothy's call. The ditch. Simone's face. The way she flinched when I touched her. The words she said in the car. then the hospital, the doctor, the injuries, and finally, Renata. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't need to. Calvin wrote everything down. Every name, every time, every detail that mattered. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, the room felt quieter than before. He tapped his pen lightly against the paper, then looked up at me. Okay, he said. Here's what we're going to do. That sentence did something to me. Not comfort. Something stronger. Direction. We start with a report, he continued. Before anything else. It needs to be documented while it's fresh. She's barely conscious, I said. She can still give a statement, he replied calmly. Even partial. That matters. He wasn't wrong. He's rarely wrong. Calvin spent 22 years with the Chatham County Sheriff's Department. He knows how cases fall apart and how they hold together. Renata Caldwell, he said, writing the name again. She's known in that county. I looked at him. You already knew that. He gave a small nod. The Caldwell family's been around a long time. Construction, land, political donations. Of course, it always connects back to something like that. Power, money, influence. She thinks that protects her, I said. Calvin didn't answer right away. He closed the legal pad, set the pen down, and leaned back slightly in his chair. It protects her until it doesn't, he said. That was enough. Around 3:15 a.m., a deputy arrived. Young, maybe late 20s. He looked like he hadn't expected to be dealing with something like this tonight. Calvin stood when he walked in, not aggressively, just enough to shift the tone of the room. Deputy, he said evenly, showing his ID from his old department. Appreciate you coming. The deputy nodded, immediately more focused. We walked back into Simone's room together. She was awake again. Barely, but awake enough. I stayed by her side while the deputy pulled a small notebook from his pocket. Ma'am, he said gently, I need to ask you a few questions about what happened. Simone's eye moved toward me. I gave her a small nod. She understood. She always has. Her voice was weak, but steady enough to carry. She told him about the call from Renata, about the meeting that wasn't a meeting, about the two men, about the pressure to sign something she never saw clearly. And then, the moment everything shifted. They said I wasn't family, she whispered, that I needed to understand that. The deputy's pen moved faster. And then, he asked. One of them grabbed me, she said. I tried to leave. I hit something metal. Her breathing grew uneven again. Calvin stepped in just enough. That's enough for now, he said quietly. The deputy nodded. He knew better than to push. Case number will be assigned by morning, he said. We'll follow up. He left quickly, but the room felt different after he did. Documented. Real. This wasn't just something that happened anymore. It was a case. Calvin waited until Simone drifted back into sleep before speaking again. That's step one, he said. What's step two? I asked. He picked up his phone. The land. I stared at him. That's what this is about, he continued. It's always about something. Nobody risks this kind of exposure without a reason. He stepped into the hallway to make the call. I watched him through the glass window. Same posture. Same calm movements. Like he was ordering breakfast instead of setting something in motion. He came back 10 minutes later. Patricia, he said. Property attorney. Atlanta. Owes me a favor. Of course he had someone. Documents will be pulled first thing in the morning, he added. We'll know exactly who owns what and who doesn't. I leaned back in the chair. For the first time since this started, something felt clear. Not resolved, but outlined. If Renata thought Simone would sign something, I said slowly, then she believes she has a claim. Or she knows she doesn't, Calvin replied. And this was her way of fixing that. That landed harder. Because it meant something simple. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't family conflict. This was intention. Calculated. Planned. I looked at my daughter lying in that hospital bed. Bruised. Broken. Still carrying life inside her. And I realized something else. Renata didn't expect resistance. She expected compliance. Fear. Silence. She miscalculated. Morning came slowly. By 9 a.m., Calvin had coffee in his hand and answers on his phone. He stepped back into the room and looked at me. It's confirmed, he said. I didn't speak. 200 acres. Route 9 property. Valued just over $2 million. My chest tightened slightly. And? I asked. He held my gaze. It's deeded to Marcus Caldwell and his legal spouse. I didn't need him to say it. Simone. Joint ownership, he added. Not as a loan. Not transferable without her. There it was. The reason. The motive. The entire thing laid out in one clean line. Renata had no claim. Not legally. Not structurally. Not at all. She knew, I said. Calvin nodded once. She knew. Silence settled in again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one had weight, direction, purpose. I looked at Simone, then back at Calvin. She tried to force her to sign. I said, yes. And when that didn't work, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I exhaled slowly. Not shaking. Not breaking. Just steady. Okay, I said. Calvin watched me carefully. Okay, he repeated. I met his eyes. We moved forward. A small shift crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but close. That's what I was hoping you'd say. I looked back at my daughter one more time. And this time, what I felt wasn't confusion, or even anger. It was clarity. Cold. Focused. Whoever thought they could erase her. Whoever thought they could take what was hers. They had just made the worst mistake of their lives. By late afternoon, the hospital room felt different. Not because Simone was better. She wasn't. Her breathing was still shallow. Her movement slow. Every time she shifted even slightly, there was a flicker of pain she tried, and failed, to hide. But something else had changed. Now we knew why. And once you understand the reason behind something like this, it stops feeling random. It becomes a pattern. A pattern you can follow. A pattern you can break. Marcus arrived just before sunset. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. Quick. Uneven. The kind of pace that tells you someone already knows something is wrong, but hasn't accepted how bad it really is. He stopped in the doorway. And for a moment, he didn't move. Simone was lying there, still, pale, her face swollen and bruised, her body connected to machines that made soft, steady sounds. His wife. The mother of his child. He looked like someone had taken the ground out from under him. Simone, he said quietly. His voice broke on her name. That mattered to me. Not enough to trust him, but enough to pay attention. He walked slowly to the bed, like he was afraid the whole scene might disappear if he moved too fast. He reached for her hand. Carefully, like he didn't know if he had the right anymore. Simone opened her eyes slightly when she felt him. Marcus, she whispered. He lowered his head, pressing his forehead gently against hers. I'm here, he said. I'm right here. I watched them. Silent. Still. Measuring. Because at that moment, there were only two possibilities. Either he knew, or he didn't. Calvin stepped closer to me, his voice low. Watch him, he murmured. Don't listen to what he says first. Watch what he does. I didn't answer. I was already doing that. Marcus pulled back slightly, his eyes scanning Simone's face, her injuries, the bandages. What happened? He asked, his voice tight. Who did this? There it was. No hesitation. No deflection. A direct question. Simone's gaze drifted toward me, then back to him. It was Renata, she said. The room went still. Marcus didn't react immediately, but I saw it. That moment. The split second where something inside him tried to reject what he just heard. And failed. That's not, he started. Then stopped. Because something in Simone's face made it impossible to finish that sentence. She called me. Simone continued softly. Said you wanted to meet, about the land. Marcus shook his head immediately. I didn't, he said. I was in Atlanta all day. I had meetings. I can show you. I know, Simone said. That hit harder than anything else. Because it meant she already understood. This wasn't confusion. This was betrayal. Marcus stepped back slightly, running a hand through his hair. My God, he muttered. He looked toward me then. For the first time. Eleanor. I didn't know anything about this. I held his gaze. Didn't answer right away. People reveal more in silence than they do when you rush them. I believe you didn't know, I said finally. Not warmth. Not forgiveness. Just truth. For now. He nodded. He understood exactly what that meant. Calvin stepped forward then. No aggression. Just presence. Marcus, he said calmly. We're going to need everything you have from yesterday. Calls. Messages. Timeline. Marcus looked at him. Recognized what he was dealing with immediately. Of course, he said. Anything you need. Good answer. But answers are easy. Proof matters. Within minutes, Marcus had his phone out. Emails. Call logs. Calendar entries. Everything lined up. He had been in Atlanta. Meetings from morning until late afternoon. No gaps. No contact with Simone about any lunch meeting. Calvin reviewed everything quietly. No commentary. No emotion. Just facts. When he was done, he handed the phone back. He didn't set her up, Calvin said to me. Simple. Clear. Confirmed. Marcus sat down heavily in the chair beside Simone's bed. She used my name, he said quietly. No one responded. Because we already knew. There was a long silence after that. The kind that settles over a room when everyone understands the same thing at the same time. Renata hadn't just attacked Simone. She had planned it, used Marcus as bait, removed him from the situation, brought in strangers, applied pressure, and when that didn't work, she escalated. Marcus looked at Simone again, then at me. What do we do? He asked. That question told me everything I needed to know. Not what happened, not why, but what do we do? He wasn't denying it anymore. He wasn't defending her. He was choosing a side. I stood up slowly. My chair made a soft sound against the floor. And for a moment, everyone in that room was looking at me. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't step closer. I didn't need to. We don't argue with people like her, I said. Calm. Flat. Certain. We don't confront her. We don't warn her. I looked directly at Marcus. We document. Then at Calvin. We build. And finally, back at my daughter. We finish it. No one spoke after that. Because there wasn't anything left to say. The direction had been set. And from that point on, this wasn't about what happened anymore. This was about what was going to happen next. The next morning didn't start with emotion. It started with movement. Calvin was already awake before I was. When I stepped into the hospital hallway just after 7 a.m., he was sitting in the waiting area with that same yellow legal pad, a fresh cup of coffee beside him, like nothing about this situation had the power to shake him. That steadiness mattered, because I could feel it now, the weight of what we were stepping into. Not just a family issue, not just an assault. This was going to turn into something bigger. Simone stable? He asked as I sat down. For now, I said. He nodded once. Then he turned the legal pad toward me. There were names written down. Arrows. Notes. Times. Structure. Walk me through Renata again, he said. Not the event. The person. That's how Calvin works. He doesn't just look at what happened. He looks at who made it happen. I took a breath. 41, I said. Unmarried. Never left the family property. He wrote it down. Financially. Dependent, he asked. Yes. Resentful. I didn't answer right away. I thought about the dinners. The looks. The silence that always carried just a little too much meaning. Yes, I said finally. But controlled. Not emotional. He underlined something on the page. That's worse, he said. And he was right. Because emotional people explode. Controlled people plan. Her father? Calvin asked. Gerald Caldwell Sr. built everything. Construction. Land. Dead. 18 months. He nodded again. And the will. That's what we just confirmed, I said. The land didn't go to her. That was the piece. The one everything connected back to. Calvin leaned back slightly in his chair. Then this was never about family, he said. I looked at him. It was about control, he continued. She lost it when the will was read. And instead of accepting that, she tried to take it back. At 8:45 a.m., his phone rang. He didn't even need to check the screen. Patricia, he said, answering immediately. He stood and stepped a few feet away, but not far enough that I couldn't hear parts of the conversation. Short sentences. Direct questions. No wasted words. When he came back, his expression hadn't changed, but there was something behind it now. Confirmation. She's already moving, he said. I felt my chest tighten slightly. Meaning? I asked. Property records show activity, he replied. Renata's been making inquiries. Quiet ones. About transfer processes. Legal options. Of course she had. People like her don't wait. They move before anyone else realizes there's a game being played. So she knew she didn't have it, I said. Yes, Calvin answered. And she knew time wasn't on her side. Because Simone was pregnant. Because a child meant permanence. Legal ties that couldn't be undone easily. I sat back in the chair, letting that settle. She wasn't trying to scare her, I said slowly. Calvin looked at me. She was trying to remove her. I continued. There it was. The truth, stripped down to its simplest form. Not pressure. Not intimidation. Elimination. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Because once you understand something like that, there's no going back to thinking smaller. At 10:30 a.m., Patricia called again. This time, Calvin put her on speaker. Her voice was sharp. Efficient. The kind of person who doesn't waste time explaining things twice. I've reviewed the estate documents, she said. There's no ambiguity. The Route 9 property is jointly owned by Marcus Caldwell and his legal spouse. That means Simone. I understand that, Calvin said. What about attempts to transfer under pressure? There's precedent, Patricia replied. But it requires proof. Coercion. Threat. Physical harm strengthens that argument significantly. Physical harm. Simone, lying in that bed. That wasn't just tragedy anymore. It was evidence. Can we block any immediate action? I asked. There was a brief pause. Yes, Patricia said. I can file a notice. It won't stop everything, but it will slow her down. Force visibility. Do it, I said. No hesitation. No second thought. After the call ended, Calvin closed the legal pad again. That's step 2, he said. I nodded. What's step 3? He looked at me. And for the first time since this started, there was something harder in his expression. We find the men, he said. That part moved faster than I expected. Because people like Renata make one mistake. They assume everyone around them is as careful as they are. They're not. By early afternoon, Calvin had already made 2 calls. Old contacts. People who still owed him favors. People who knew how to ask questions without making it obvious they were asking. Information started coming in quietly. No noise. No attention. Just pieces. 2 men seen near Route 9 yesterday, Calvin said, flipping a page on the pad. Truck. Older model. No plates recorded, but description matches a vehicle tied to a contractor out of the next county. Contractor? I asked. Small jobs. Cash work, he replied. The kind you hire when you don't want records. That made sense. Too much sense. And the phone? I asked. Working on it, he said. One of them pinged a tower near the property. Technology doesn't lie. People do. I stood up and walked back toward Simone's room. Every step felt heavier now. Not because I was unsure, but because everything was becoming clearer. Defined. When I stepped inside, she was awake again. Her eye moved toward me. Tired. Weak. But still there. Still fighting. I walked over and sat beside her. They're not going to get away with this, I said quietly. She didn't respond right away, but her fingers moved slightly, reaching. I took her hand. Gently. Carefully. And this time, she didn't flinch. That was all I needed. Because in that moment, something settled inside me completely. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about anger. It was about correction. About making sure the people who thought they could do this understood exactly what it cost. And by the time I walked back out into that hallway again, I knew one thing for certain. We weren't reacting anymore. We were building a case. By late afternoon, the pace changed. Up until that point, everything had been about understanding. Now it was about proving. Calvin didn't rush. That's what made him effective. He let information come to him, piece by piece, like he was building something invisible that only he could see. By 3 p.m., he had names. Not full names yet, but enough. 2 men, he said, tapping the edge of his legal pad. Both local. Both do cash jobs. No contracts. No paperwork unless absolutely necessary. I leaned against the wall, arms folded. Hired hands, I said. He nodded. Not professionals. That's important. Why? I asked. Because professionals don't talk, he said. These 2 will. That made sense. Renata planned carefully, but she didn't control everything. No one does. Phone data came through. Calvin continued. One of them had a device ping off the Route 9 tower around the same time Simone was there. That's enough. I asked. It's a start, he said. It puts him there. And once you put someone at the scene, you start pulling threads. I watched him flip to another page. There's more, he said. I didn't speak. I waited. One of them has a record, he added. Minor charges. Nothing major. But enough to make him nervous about being pulled into something bigger. That was the opening. Not force. Pressure. The right kind. What about Renata? I asked. Calvin's expression didn't change. She's quiet, he said. Too quiet. Of course she was. People like her don't panic. They adjust. Patricia filed the notice this morning, he continued. Property is flagged. Any attempt to move it now triggers review. So she's blocked, I said. For now, he replied. But that's not the goal. I looked at him. What is? He met my eyes. We don't just stop her, he said. We prove what she did. That was the difference. Stopping someone ends a problem. Proving it ends their ability to do it again. Around 4:30, Calvin's phone rang again. He answered without looking at the screen. Listened. Didn't interrupt. Then said one word. Where? A pause. Send it. He hung up. What is it? I asked. He stood up slowly. They found the truck. It was parked behind a small repair shop just outside the next county line. Old model. Faded paint. Exactly the kind of vehicle that doesn't draw attention. We didn't go there. That's not how this works. Instead, Calvin made another call. This time official. By early evening, the first real break came. One of the men had been picked up for questioning. Not arrested. Not yet. Just brought in. Will he talk? I asked. Calvin didn't answer right away. He poured himself another cup of coffee from the thermos, took a slow sip, then set it down. He will, he said finally. How do you know? He looked at me. Because this wasn't supposed to go this far, he said. And now it has. People like that don't plan for consequences. They plan for quick money. Simple outcomes. When things get complicated, they fold. We got the call just after 7 p.m. Calvin stepped outside again to take it. I stayed in the hallway, staring through the glass at Simone, watching her breathe. Steady. Still here. Still fighting. When Calvin came back in, he didn't sit down. He just looked at me. And I knew. He talked, I said. Calvin gave a small nod. Yes. I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Something closer to confirmation. What did he say? I asked. Calvin walked over, set the legal pad down on the chair beside me, and opened it. $500 each, he said. Paid in cash. I didn't react. I let him continue. They were told to convince her to sign. Paperwork, he added. Nothing specific. Just pressure. And when she refused? I asked. Calvin's jaw tightened slightly. They escalated, he said. That word again. Escalated. Like it was something that just happened. Like it wasn't a choice. He said she fought back. Calvin continued. Tried to leave. That's when she hit the fence. I closed my eyes for a second. Just one. Then opened them again. And after? I asked. They left, he said. Took her phone. Drove off. 7 months pregnant. Left on the side of the road. I exhaled slowly. Controlled. Measured. What about Renata? I asked. Calvin turned the page. There are messages, he said. That got my attention. Text messages, he continued. Between her and one of the men. Not explicit, but clear enough. How clear? I asked. He looked at me. Clear enough to show intent, he said. That was all I needed. The room felt different again. Heavier. But sharper. Defined. This wasn't theory anymore. It wasn't assumption. It was evidence. Next step? I asked. Calvin closed the legal pad. Now we bring it together, he said. I nodded. And her? I asked quietly. He held my gaze. She's not going to expect this, he said. I looked back at Simone, then at my own reflection in the glass. For a moment, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Not fear. Not grief. Something else. Something colder. More focused. Because at that point, everything was clear. She planned it. She paid for it. She thought she could control it. And now? Now it was out of her hands. I stood up slowly, adjusted my jacket, and for the first time since this started, I allowed myself one simple thought. Not loud, not emotional, just certain. This wasn't going to stay inside that family. This was going to court. The next morning didn't feel like the beginning of something. It felt like the middle, because by then, the story wasn't what happened anymore. It was what we could prove. Simone was still in the hospital, still weak, still in pain, but stable. That word kept coming up. Stable. Like it was supposed to mean everything was under control. It didn't. It just meant she was still here. I brought her water that morning. Adjusted her. Blanket. Small things. Normal things. Because when everything around you shifts, you hold on to what doesn't. Mom, she said quietly. Her voice was stronger than the night before, but it still carried weight. I turned toward her. Yeah. She hesitated. Not because she didn't know what to say, because she didn't know how to say it. What if nothing happens? She asked. I didn't answer right away. I walked over, sat down, took her hand carefully. Not too tight, not too sudden. They already made a mistake, I said. She looked at me. They thought you wouldn't fight, I continued. That's where they went wrong. She held my gaze. And slowly, she nodded. I stepped out into the hallway again. Just before 10 a.m. Calvin was already there. Same chair, same posture, same legal pad. But the pages were filling up now. Names, times, connections. DA's office has it, he said without looking up. That was fast, I replied. It needed to be, he said. Once statements and evidence line up, it moves. I leaned against the wall. And Renata? Calvin paused for a moment. They've been notified, he said. That meant one thing. She knew. Will she run? I asked. Calvin shook his head. No, he said. People like her don't run. I looked at him. They stay, he continued. They try to control the situation. That made sense. Because up until now she had. Around noon, Marcus came back. Different this time. Quieter. Less shock. More focus. He walked straight over to Calvin. What do you need from me? He asked. No hesitation. No excuses. That mattered. Everything, Calvin said. Marcus nodded. I've already sent my emails to your contact, he said. Call logs too. Good, Calvin replied. We may need a statement later. You'll have it, Marcus said. Then he looked at me. I'm not protecting her, he added. I studied him for a second. Not his words. His tone. Flat. Direct. Resolved. I know, I said. And for the first time, I meant it. By early afternoon, the pressure started to shift. Not on us. On her. Calvin got another call. Short. Quiet. But when he hung up, there was something different in his eyes. They've issued a warrant, he said. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Just waited. For Renata, he added. It didn't feel like victory. Not yet. Because a warrant isn't an ending. It's a beginning. When? I asked. Soon, he said. They're coordinating. Of course they were. Because cases like this, they don't just happen. They're built. Step by step. I walked back into Simone's room. She was awake again. Watching the door. Waiting. I could see it in her eyes. That need to know. That need to feel safe again. They're coming for her, I said. No build-up. No softening. Just the truth. Simone's expression didn't change right away. Then slowly, her shoulders relaxed. Just a little. Okay, she whispered. That was all. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside again. Same parking lot. Same space between the trucks. But everything felt different now. Sharper. Closer. My phone buzzed. Calvin. They picked her up, he said. Just like that. No drama. No build-up. She's in custody. I closed my eyes for a second. Not long. Just enough. Then opened them again. Good, I said. I stood there for a while after the call ended. Thinking. Not about revenge. Not about anger. About process. Because this wasn't finished. Not even close. Arrest is one thing. Proof is another. And conviction? That takes everything. When I walked back inside, Calvin was already writing again. Adding to the pages. Building forward. Always forward. What now? I asked. He didn't look up. Now we make sure it holds, he said. I nodded. Because I understood exactly what he meant. This wasn't about catching her. That part was done. This was about making sure. She never walked away from it. The arrest didn't change the room. Not immediately. Simone was still in that hospital bed. Still bruised. Still healing. The machines didn't stop beeping just because someone was in custody. And that mattered. Because it reminded me of something simple. This wasn't about a moment. It was about everything that came after. Is she really arrested? Simone asked that evening. Her voice was quiet. Careful. Like she didn't want to believe it too quickly. I sat beside her, adjusting the edge of her blanket. Yes, I said. She's in custody. Simone stared at the ceiling for a few seconds. Then she let out a slow breath. Not relief. Not exactly. More like tension leaving a place it had been sitting too long. Calvin stepped into the room a few minutes later. Same steady walk. Same unreadable expression. But I knew him well enough to see it. We had crossed a line. Now we were in the part where things could go wrong. They'll try to minimize it, he said. Simone looked at him. Who, she asked. Her attorney, he replied. Anyone connected to that family. That made sense. Because people like Renata don't just disappear quietly. They push back. How? I asked. Calvin leaned slightly against the wall. They'll say it wasn't planned, he said. That it was a misunderstanding. That the men acted on their own. Simone's hand tightened slightly on the sheet. That's not what happened, she said. I know, Calvin replied. But what matters isn't what we know. He paused. It's what we can prove. That word again. Proof. Later that night, Calvin and I sat in the waiting area again. Same chairs. Same dim lighting. But now the pages on that legal pad were full. He flipped through them slowly. Statements are consistent, he said. That's good. And the texts? I asked. He nodded. They're the key. He turned the pad toward me. Not the actual messages. Those were with the investigators. But his notes. Short phrases. Timestamps. Connections. Make sure she understands this isn't her family, he read. I felt something cold settle in my chest. And after? I asked. He looked at the next line. Done, he said. Silence. That was enough. It didn't matter that she didn't say hurt her. It didn't matter that she didn't spell it out. Intent doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it just confirms. They responded? I asked. Calvin nodded. Yeah. One word. That's all it took. I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes for a second, because now it was clear, not just what happened, but how it would be seen. This holds? I asked. Calvin didn't answer immediately. He thought about it. That's something I've always respected about him. He doesn't give you comfort answers. He gives you real ones. It's strong, he said finally. But it's not finished. What's missing? Connection, he replied. We need to tie her directly to their actions. I opened my eyes. She paid them, I said. Yes, he nodded. But we need it clean. Documented. Undeniable. That was the difference between suspicion and conviction. The next morning, things moved again. Faster this time. Because once someone is in custody, the clock starts. Calvin got the call around 9:20 a.m. I was standing by the window in Simone's room, watching the parking lot below. Cars coming and going. People moving like nothing in the world had changed. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him. They're pushing charges, he said. Simone turned her head slightly. What charges? She asked. Calvin looked at her. Aggravated battery, he said. Conspiracy. Coercion related to property transfer. The words landed heavy, but they were solid. Real. Simone swallowed. Does that mean, she started. It means this isn't going away, I said. She nodded slowly. Later that afternoon, Marcus came back again. This time, he didn't sit. He stood at the foot of the bed, hands at his sides. I spoke to the attorney, he said. No one interrupted. She's trying to say she wasn't there, he added. That she didn't know what they would do. Calvin gave a small nod. Expected, he said. Marcus looked frustrated. Not loud. Not emotional. Just controlled. That's not what happened, he said. I know, Calvin replied again. Same words. Different weight. Marcus ran a hand across the back of his neck. What can I do, he asked. Calvin looked at him. Tell the truth, he said. Marcus nodded. I will. After he left, the room felt quieter again. But not empty. Focused. I stood by Simone's bed. Looked at her. Really looked this time. Not just the injuries. The strength. Still there. Still holding. They're going to try to change the story, I said. She didn't answer. But her eyes stayed on mine. And we're not going to let them, I added. That was the moment everything settled. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. Just clearly. Because by then, we understood something simple. This wasn't about what happened anymore. That part was done. This was about what could be rewritten. And what couldn't. And we weren't letting this be rewritten. By the time the third day came, the story had started to shift. Not in the hospital. Not in this room. Out there. You can feel it when that happens. It doesn't come with an announcement. It shows up in small ways. A different tone in someone's voice. A hesitation where there wasn't one before. A quiet sense that people are no longer just listening. They're choosing sides. Calvin saw it first. He always does. They're testing the narrative. He said that morning, flipping through his notes. I was sitting across from him, hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had already gone cold. What does that mean? I asked. He looked up. It means they're putting out their version, he said, watching how it lands. That version came faster than I expected. By noon, Marcus walked into the room again. But this time, he didn't look confused. He looked conflicted. She's saying she wasn't even there, he said. Simone's fingers tightened slightly on the blanket. I didn't move. Go on, I said. Marcus exhaled slowly. She's claiming the meeting was supposed to happen, but she left before Simone arrived. That the men were there for something else. Something else. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. And the messages? Calvin asked. Marcus shook his head. They're saying they're being taken out of context. Of course they were. That's always the first move. Deny presence. Then blur intent. Simone turned her head slightly toward Marcus. She called me, she said quietly. I heard her voice. Marcus closed his eyes for a second. I know, he said. And I believed him. Not because of the words. Because of the way he said them. Calvin leaned back in his chair. They're building distance, he said. Trying to separate her from the outcome. And will it work? I asked. He didn't answer right away. That pause mattered. It depends, he said finally. On what? On how clean our evidence is, he replied. That was the reality. Not what felt true. What could be proven true. Later that afternoon, Calvin stepped out again for another call. I stayed with Simone. The room was quiet. Too quiet. Mom, she said. After a while, I looked at her. What if people believe her? She asked. There it was. Not fear of what happened. Fear of what comes after. I leaned forward slightly. People believe what holds, I said. She frowned just a little. What does that mean? It means stories don't win, I said. Proof does. She didn't respond right away, but I could see it. That shift. That small piece of strength coming back into place. Calvin came back in about 20 minutes later. This time, he didn't sit down. They've got more, he said. I stood up. What kind of more? He looked at both of us. Phone extraction, he said. Full thread. Not just fragments. That mattered. More than anything we'd had so far. Anything new? I asked. He gave a small nod. There's a message from her, about 30 minutes before Simone arrived. My chest tightened slightly. What does it say? He looked down at his notes. Make sure she signs it. I don't care how. Silence. Simone's breathing shifted slightly. Not panic. Just wait. And after? I asked. Calvin didn't look up right away. Then, if she refuses, remind her what happens when people don't listen. That was it. That was the line. The one that changes everything. No interpretation. No ambiguity. No distance. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Not shock. Something clearer. Final. They can't spin that, I said quietly. Calvin shook his head. No, he said. They can't. That's when the room changed again. Not physically, but in a way you could feel. Because up until that moment, there had been space. Space for doubt. Space for argument. Space for her version. Now, that space was gone. Marcus stepped back slightly, running a hand through his hair. I didn't know it was like this, he said. No one responded. Because at this point, it didn't matter what he knew. What mattered was what she did. I walked over to the window, looked out at the same parking lot. Same cars. Same movement. But everything felt different. Because now, we weren't defending a story. We were holding evidence. And once you have that, the rest is just time. By the end of the week, everything moved out of the hospital and into the system. Simone was discharged on Friday morning. Not because she was healed, but because she was stable enough to continue somewhere safer. Home. Marcus drove her. Carefully. Slower than necessary. Like if he went too fast, something might break again. I sat in the back seat beside her. One hand resting near hers. Not holding. Just there. Present. The house felt different when we walked in. Same walls. Same furniture. But the air had changed. Because now, everything inside it was part of something bigger. Calvin didn't come inside right away. He stood on the porch, finishing a call. Always one step ahead. Always moving something forward. When he walked in, he didn't sit. Didn't relax. He set the legal pad on the table. Opened it. We have a timeline, he said. That was the next step. Not just what happened, but when. And how everything connected. He started laying it out. Call from Renata, 10:12 a.m., he said. Simone nodded slightly. Arrival at Route 9, around 12:30. Another nod. Phone goes offline shortly after. That part, we already knew why. Truck seen leaving the area at 1:05, Calvin continued. Phone pings confirmed both men were there. He turned the page. Message sent from Renata at 1:12 p.m. Done? Silence. That one line carried everything. Not emotion. Not confusion. Just expectation. Response at 1:14, yeah. Calvin closed the pad slowly. That's your window, he said. I looked at Simone. She was listening. Really listening. Not reacting. Not breaking. Just absorbing. That's what they'll build the case on, Calvin added. Sequence. Intent. Outcome. Marcus leaned against the counter. Hands pressed flat. They can't deny that, he said. Calvin didn't answer. Because denial isn't about truth. It's about strategy. They already are, I said. Marcus looked at me. They'll say the message wasn't about her, I continued. Or that it meant something else. He nodded slowly. Because he knew. That's when Calvin stepped in again. They can say whatever they want, he said. We both looked at him. But they have to say it under oath. That changes things. Because words are easy. Until they're recorded. By Monday, formal charges were filed. Everything moved faster after that. Because now it wasn't just an investigation. It was a case. Simone sat at the kitchen table when Calvin told her. Her hands were wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Aggravated battery, he said. Conspiracy. Attempted coercion tied to property transfer. She didn't react immediately. Then, good, she said quietly. Not anger. Not relief. Just acceptance. That's when I knew she was ready. Not to fight emotionally. To stand. The attorney, Patricia, came in that afternoon. Sharp. Focused. Exactly the kind of person you want when things get complicated. She didn't waste time. I've reviewed everything, she said. This is strong. Calvin gave a small nod. But, I asked. There's always a but. They'll try to separate her from the act, Patricia said. Same pattern. Distance. Doubt. Delay. How do we stop that? Simone asked. Patricia looked at her. We don't stop it, she said. We outprove it. That word again. Proof. Patricia laid out the next steps. Statements. Depositions. Pretrial motions. All the things that happen before anyone ever steps into a courtroom. It's going to take time, she said. Simone nodded. I'm not going anywhere, she replied. That was the moment everything locked in. Because time only matters if you're not prepared to wait. That night, after everyone left, the house was quiet again. Not empty, just still. I stood in the kitchen, looking at the same table where everything had just been discussed. Same surface, same chairs, but now it held something different. Structure, plan, direction. Simone was upstairs, resting. Marcus was in the other room, on the phone, handling things, fixing what he could, trying. And Calvin, he was still at the table, writing. Anything else? I asked. He didn't look up. There's always something else, he said. I walked over and stood beside him. Looked down at the page. Names, dates, connections, everything building toward one place. Court. Will it hold? I asked quietly. He paused, then finally looked up at me. Yes, he said. Not confident. Not hopeful. Certain. I nodded once. Because that's all I needed. At that point, there was nothing left to figure out. Nothing left to guess. Everything that happened was now recorded, and everything that was coming next was already in motion. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature. In feeling. By the time the trial began, months had passed. Enough time for the bruises to fade. For the swelling to go down. For Simone to learn how to move again without wincing every time she turned her body. But time doesn't erase what happened. It just makes it quieter. I sat in the third row. Same seat, every day, behind the prosecution. Close enough to hear everything. Far enough to watch. Simone sat at the front. Beside Patricia. Back straight. Hands folded. Calm. She looked different. Not fragile. Not broken. Controlled. Calvin sat next to me. Same posture as always. Still. Observing. Writing when it mattered. Renata sat across the room. At the defense table. Perfectly dressed. Hair in place. Composed. If you didn't know the story, you wouldn't think she belonged there. That's how people like her survive. They look like they don't need to explain anything. The defense went first. That's how it works. They don't deny everything. They reshape it. It was a misunderstanding, her attorney said. Clear voice. Confident. Practiced. She wasn't present when the incident occurred. There it was. Distance. The individuals involved acted independently. Separation. There was no intent to harm. Minimization. I didn't react. Because none of that was new. We had heard all of it before. Simone didn't react either. She just sat there. Listening. Then it was our turn. Patricia didn't rush. Didn't raise her voice. Didn't try to overpower the room. She built. Let's talk about the timeline, she said. Piece by piece. Call logs. Location data. Vehicle movement. Everything lined up. Clean. Structured. Unavoidable. Then came the messages. The courtroom didn't change when they were read. But the air did. Make sure she signs it. I don't care how. Patricia let that sit. Didn't explain it. Didn't soften it. Then done. And the response. Yeah. That was the moment. Not loud. Not dramatic. But final. I watched the jury. Not all of them. Just enough. You can tell when something lands. They don't move. They don't look around. They just hold still. That's what happened. The defense tried to respond. Of course they did. Context, her attorney said. Misinterpretation. But the problem with that is that context doesn't erase sequence. And misinterpretation doesn't erase outcome. Then came the testimony. One of the men, the one with the record. He didn't look at her. Didn't even turn his head. He just spoke. She paid us, he said. Flat. Direct. To get her to sign something. And when she didn't, Patricia asked. He hesitated. Just for a second. We pushed, he said. That word again. Pushed. And after she fell, the courtroom stayed quiet. But everyone understood what that meant. Simone didn't look at him. She didn't need to. The rest of it came together quickly after that. Documents, medical reports, expert testimony, everything pointing in one direction. Not confusion, not accident, intent, deliberate, controlled, calculated. Renata didn't speak. Not once. She didn't have to. Her attorney spoke for her. But silence doesn't protect you when everything else is speaking. By the time closing arguments came, there wasn't much left to say. Patricia stood, looked at the jury. "This case is not complicated," she said. She paused. "Let the room settle. It is about a decision." Another pause. A decision to use force when control failed. That was it. No long speech. No emotional appeal. Just truth. The jury left. For hours. That's how long it took. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't think about what might happen. Because by then, I already knew. When they came back, the room stood. The foreperson held the paper. And just like everything else in this process, it was quiet. Guilty. On all counts. No reaction. Not from me. Not from Simone. Because this wasn't the moment. The moment had already happened. Back on that road. In that car. This was just the outcome. And for the first time since all of this started, there was nothing left to prove. The house was quiet again. Not the heavy kind of quiet from before. Not the kind that feels like something is missing. This was different. This was settled. It had been months since the trial ended. Months since the verdict. Months. Since that word, guilty, closed a door that had been open far too long. Simone was standing in the kitchen when I walked in that morning. Not sitting. Not resting. Standing. One hand on the counter. The other resting gently over her stomach. She turned when she heard me. And she smiled. It wasn't a big smile. Not dramatic. Just real. "How are you feeling?" I asked. Same question I had asked 100 times before. But now, it meant something different. "Better," she said. And this time, I believed her. The bruises were gone. The swelling had faded. The physical damage had healed. But that wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that she didn't look over her shoulder anymore. Marcus walked in a few minutes later. Coffee in his hand. Phone already in the other. Still working. Still fixing things. Still trying to rebuild what had been broken. He nodded at me. Not awkward. Not distant. Just steady. He had chosen his place. And he had stayed there. That mattered too. Calvin came by that afternoon. Same as always. Didn't call ahead. Didn't need to. He walked in, set his keys on the table, and looked around like he was checking something invisible. "All good?" he asked. Simone nodded. "Yeah," she said. He studied her for a second, then gave a small nod back. That was his version of approval. We sat on the back porch later that evening. The three of us. Same chairs. Same view. The garden looked different now. Not because it had changed. Because I had. 7 years, Simone said quietly. She wasn't asking. Just stating it. Calvin leaned back slightly. "She won't serve all of it," he said. "But enough." Simone nodded. There was no celebration in that moment. No sense of victory. Because this was never about winning. It was about stopping something. And making sure it couldn't happen again. "I keep thinking about that day," Simone said. Her voice was calm. Not breaking. Just remembering. "I thought I was going to lose everything," she added. I didn't interrupt. "I thought no one would believe me," she continued. I looked at her then. Really looked. "But you did," she said. I shook my head slightly. "No," I said. "I didn't just believe you." She met my eyes. I made sure everyone else had to. Silence settled in after that. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was complete. A few weeks later, Simone gave birth. It wasn't easy. Nothing about this journey had been. But it was safe. Controlled. Surrounded by people who were paying attention. That mattered. When the nurse placed the baby in her arms, Simone cried. Not from pain. Not from fear. From release. I stood beside her. Watching. Not saying anything. Because there are moments you don't interrupt. "She's strong," Simone whispered. I smiled slightly. "She has to be," I said. We named her Ruby. Calvin held her later that day. Awkward at first. Like he wasn't used to something that small. But he didn't let go. Marcus stood beside them. Quiet. Present. And for the first time, everything felt like it was where it was supposed to be. Not perfect. Not untouched. But right. That night, I went back home. My house. My garden. I stepped outside and walked to the same row of tomato plants where this had all started. The vines were different now. Some dried. Some still holding on. I reached down and pulled one from the stem. Slowly. Carefully. The same motion. The same place. But not the same person. Because now I understood something I hadn't before. You don't always get to choose what happens to your family, but you do get to choose what happens next. You can stay quiet, look away, hope it fixes itself. You can stand, you can document, you can build, and you can make sure that no one ever gets to hurt them like that again. I went back inside, closed the door behind me, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to happen, because it already had, and it was finished. If this story moved you, don't just scroll away. There are so many people out there who feel alone, who've been hurt, betrayed, or silenced inside their own families. And stories like this remind them they're not alone. Backhand index pointing right, so take a second to subscribe to the channel. Backhand index pointing right, hit like so more people can find this video. Backhand index pointing right, and most importantly, share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Because sometimes, the right story at the right moment can change how someone sees their own life.